At first light, on a humid August morning in 1942, the roar of engines and the scent of hot metal filled Eagle Farm Airfield outside Brisbane. Captain Paul "Pappy" Gunn crouched beneath the wing of a Douglas A-20 Havoc, watching as mechanics welded massive 50-caliber Browning machine guns into the bomber's nose. The seat where the Bombardier once sat was gone, replaced by 4 guns capable of firing 1,700 rounds per minute. At 43, with 21 years of service in the Navy, Gunn's mind was elsewhere. His wife and 4 children were prisoners of the Japanese in Manila, their fate a constant, gnawing worry. The 5th Air Force was hemorrhaging planes. Bombers were disappearing faster than replacements arrived. In July alone, 11 A-22s were lost trying to hit Japanese convoys from high-altitude planes, shredded by deck guns, or missing their targets entirely. Gunn had witnessed the fiery deaths of 3 crews over the Coral Sea the previous week. The Japanese were reinforcing New Guinea with near impunity. Something had to change. Gunn's idea was audacious, almost reckless. What if bombers attacked low, skimming the water like skipping stones, hitting ships at point-blank range? The key was survival, overwhelming Japanese deck guns before they could react. That meant turning standard bombers into flying weapons of concentrated firepower. The A-22s were lightly armed 4 30-caliber machine guns that bounced harmlessly off ship armor. Gunn needed heavier guns, 50-caliber Browning machine guns capable of tearing through steel. He scavenged weapons from wrecked P-39 and P-40 fighters, dead aircraft, but guns that still fired. Mounting them on a steel frame in the nose, he added the weight of ammunition, 200 pounds, concentrated at the front of the plane. The first test flight nearly killed the pilot. The plane fought the sky, threatening to nosedive. Gunn spent 2 days recalibrating, moving equipment aft, adjusting the tail trim. When the second pilot finally flew it, he reported it felt angry. But it flew. By September 12th, 16 modified A-22s were descending on Buna at treetop height. Guns blazing, they strafed Japanese airfields, destroying 14 aircraft on the ground and silencing every anti-aircraft gun. Not a single A-20 was lost. The results were undeniable, but the A-22s had limits. Their range was too short, their bomb load too light to strike deeper targets. Gunn's solution was bigger, the B-25 Mitchell. By December, he had stripped the Bombardier seat from a B-25C, installed 4 50-caliber guns in the nose, 4 more in external cheek mounts, and rotated the top turret forward. 14 guns in total. The plane could unleash 215 pounds of lead every second. Ground crews called it Pappy's Folly. Engineers back in the U.S. would later label it impossible. But Gunn saw something else. Potential. The prototype's first flight in Australia was tense, nose heavy. It threatened to plow into the runway on takeoff. Once airborne, it was a flying battering ram. General Kenny, commander of the 5th Air Force, immediately ordered a dozen more conversions. Mechanics worked 18-hour days to prepare 30 aircraft for combat by February 1943, when U.S. engineers back in Ohio examined the modifications. They declared them unworkable, too heavy, too unbalanced, too dangerous. But the planes were already combat-proven. 12 B-25s had just annihilated a Japanese convoy in the Bismarck Sea, destroying every transport. Intelligence had spotted a critical Japanese convoy leaving Rabaul, 8 transports and 8 destroyers, nearly 7,000 troops bound for Leh. The convoy's commanders counted on poor weather and heavy clouds to protect them. They were wrong. On the morning of March 3rd, 12 B-25 strafers roared out of Port Moresby at wave-top height, guns firing, bombs primed to skip across the water. They were supported by 30 modified A-22s, Australian fighters, and P-38 Lightnings to fend off Japanese Zeros. The attack was cinematic in its execution. The B-25s surged like a wall of steel and fire, 14 guns per plane, all converging on the convoy. At 2 miles out, the transports tried to maneuver, but it was too late. The first 50-caliber rounds ripped through superstructures, shattered bridges, and killed the anti-aircraft crews before they could aim. Bombs skipped across the waves, tearing hulls open below the waterline. The first transport went down in under a minute. Other ships fared no better. Teomaru was bracketed by 4 strafers from multiple angles. Decks erupted in fire as officers and crew were cut down instantly. Bombs ripped the ship in two. Survivors leaped into the sea, weighed down by gear, dragged beneath the waves. Destroyers tried to respond, but the combination of B-25 strafers and supporting A-22s left them vulnerable. By mid-morning, the Japanese convoy was scattered across 40 square miles of ocean, 5 transports sinking or burning, 2 destroyers crippled. The remaining vessels tried to escape. They did not succeed. The destruction was total. When the strafers returned for a second wave in the afternoon, the Japanese had no fighters left to intercept them. Ships that had survived the first attack were obliterated with precise, low-level bombing and strafing. By evening, all 8 transports were gone. 4 destroyers sunk. Of nearly 7,000 troops, barely 1,200 reached Leh. The rest were annihilated. Allied losses were minimal: 4 aircraft, 13 aircrew. General MacArthur called it one of the most complete and annihilating combats of all time. The engineers who had called guns B-25 modifications impossible were silenced. Orders went out for immediate factory integration. Paul Gunn, the man who had turned a flying folly into a weapon of mass destruction, was summoned to California to show North American aviation how to produce the strafers properly. He left Australia reluctantly, his family still in Japanese captivity, but he carried the blueprint for a new kind of aerial warfare that would change the Southwest Pacific forever. The North American aviation plant in Long Beach, California, stretched across 140 acres, a hum of relentless activity. 20,000 workers, 3 shifts, and an assembly line that produced a B-25 every 4 hours. Paul Gunn stepped onto the factory floor with hand-drawn blueprints in hand. Engineers immediately bombarded him with questions, stress calculations, wind tunnel data, center of gravity concerns. Gunn had none of that. He had flying experience. He had results. He walked them through the modifications he had improvised in Australia, moving radio equipment aft to balance the plane, welding blast tubes to prevent the .50 caliber guns from peeling aluminum skin, and carefully adjusting the tail trim to compensate for the forward weight. Skeptical engineers watched as he explained how the aircraft had performed under combat conditions, surviving takeoffs nose-heavy, delivering torrents of fire with precision. Every impossible concern they had was met with a practical, field-tested solution. 2 weeks later, the first factory-built B-25G rolled off the line. The aircraft was a monster: 4 .50 caliber guns in the nose, a 75mm M4 cannon mounted in the fuselage, capable of piercing the hull of a destroyer. The cannon's recoil sent the plane shuddering 4 feet back, yet the gunner could reload and fire again. The B-25G was just the beginning. Soon came the B-25H, which added more .50 caliber guns in the cheek mounts and rotated the turret forward. 14 forward-firing guns, including the 75mm cannon. The final iteration, the B-25J, removed the cannon but added even more .50 caliber guns, 18 forward-firing, in total the most heavily armed production bomber in history. By October 1943, these machines were arriving in the Pacific. Gunn returned to Australia after 6 weeks, anxious to see how his designs would fare in ongoing operations. The war was far from over, and his family was still held in Manila, a constant, gnawing worry. The modified B-25 seconds, now affectionately called strafer variants, quickly proved their worth. In April 1943, they sank 16 Japanese barges. In May, 12 cargo ships at Wewak Harbour, and in June, they struck oil facilities in Borneo. Japanese supply lines were in chaos. Daylight movement by ship was nearly impossible. The B-25 seconds continued to evolve. Pilots learned to conduct night raids, skipping bombs from 50 feet in complete darkness. They coordinated with PT boats to illuminate targets with searchlights at the last moment. The Japanese had given them a nickname, the Black Death. The combination of speed, firepower, and surprise made these aircraft nearly unstoppable. On the 2nd of November 1943, the full capabilities of the modified B-25 seconds were on display at Rabaul Harbour. Major Ben Fridge led 4 squadrons of strafers, supported by 137 Allied aircraft, against 38 Japanese vessels including cruisers, destroyers, and cargo ships. Flying at masthead height, dodging phosphorus smoke and heavy anti-aircraft fire, the B-25 struck from multiple directions at once. Within 15 minutes, 30 ships were hit. 5 sank immediately. 12 were destroyed beyond repair. The harbour ceased to function as a forward supply base. Gunn himself flew that mission, 44 years old, a staff officer who should have been far from the front lines. But with his family in captivity, every sortie brought him a step closer to Manila. Reports from the internment camp were dire: rations cut, medicines scarce, prisoners dying from malnutrition and disease. The Japanese camp commander had warned that any Allied approach would result in mass executions. Gunn's resolve hardened. He told General Kenny he would fly the first mission over Manila when liberation came. Kenny promised it. As 1944 progressed, the strafers became increasingly lethal. Some B-25 carried 8 high-velocity 5-inch rockets under the wings. Others carried napalm tanks or specially designed parafrag bombs for minimum altitude bombing. Coordinated strikes with high-flying B-24 Liberators forced defenders to look up, only to be met moments later by the low-flying, heavy-gunned B-25. In the first 8 months of 1944, these aircraft destroyed 947 Japanese planes on the ground, sank 273 ships, and killed an estimated 38,000 enemy soldiers. Paul Gunn's modifications had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the Southwest Pacific. Yet the story of the B-25 was also deeply personal. Gunn continued flying missions, innovating on the fly, inventing modifications the night before a strike. He was constantly pushing the envelope, adding extra fuel tanks, improving gun cooling systems, refining ammunition loading techniques. Each flight was a calculated risk, a step closer to ending his family's captivity. By the 20th of October 1944, American forces were preparing to land at Leyte in the Philippines. Manila's liberation was only 3 months away, but Gunn's family had already endured nearly 3 years of imprisonment. Every mission he flew, every convoy destroyed, every Japanese target eradicated, was fueled by a personal mission getting Paulie and their children out alive. By late November 1944, the Pacific skies were a war zone dominated by a single, terrifying name, the B-25 strafer. The Japanese had learned quickly. These planes were unlike any they had ever faced. Gunn's innovations had given the Allies an edge that was both technological and psychological. No convoy was safe, no harbour secure. And yet, for Paul Gunn, the war remained painfully personal. On November 27, 1944, just before dawn, Japanese Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers, escorted by Zero fighters, struck Tacloban airfield. Gunn, reviewing mission plans in the operations tent barely 200 yards from the runway, was thrown off his feet by the blast wave. Shrapnel tore through the canvas walls, one fragment cutting his leg, another striking his shoulder. Blood soaked his flight suit. Yet his first thought wasn't for himself, it was for the planes, for the crews, for the missions that could bring his family closer to freedom. Ignoring the doctor's orders for surgery, he staggered 30 feet before collapsing. The army evacuated him, but even the injuries couldn't stop him from thinking about Manila. February 3rd, 1945, the Battle of Manila began. Street by street, building by building, Allied forces advanced. Japanese defenders had turned the city into a fortress. Stowe, Thomas internment camp, where Gunn's wife Paulie and their 4 children had suffered for nearly 3 years, became the focal point. When Gunn arrived on February 4th, leg still bandaged and cane in hand, the reunion was nothing short of miraculous. Paulie had lost 40 pounds, his children were weak from malnutrition and disease. 3 years of fear and starvation ended in a 4-hour embrace that none of them would ever forget. Even after the liberation, Gunn's mission was not complete. The B-25 strafers continued their deadly work across the Pacific. Crews learned new tactics daily, combining rockets, napalm, and bombs with their forward-firing guns. They struck Japanese positions at night, skipped bombs across the water, and coordinated with PT boats to annihilate enemy ships under the cover of darkness. By the end of the war, the B-25 seconds had become a cornerstone of Allied air power in the Southwest Pacific. Statistics tell only part of the story. Nearly 5,000 B-25 seconds were modified as strafers, sinking over 800 Japanese ships, destroying more than 2,000 aircraft on the ground, and killing an estimated 85,000 enemy troops. What began as a madman's idea had become a decisive weapon that changed the course of the war. The engineers in Ohio who had once called Gunn's modifications impossible were proven spectacularly wrong. Paul Gunn never flew combat again. His leg wound ended his operational career, and he retired as a full colonel in 1948. But the impact of his vision endured. Returning to the Philippines, he rebuilt Philippine Airlines, transforming it from 3 war-surplus C-47 transports into a nationwide airline serving Manila, Cebu, Davao, and beyond. His courage, ingenuity, and relentless determination in the skies had saved countless lives and reshaped the Pacific campaign. The story of Paul Gunn and his impossible B-25 strafers is more than a tale of innovation. It is a testament to human courage under pressure, the will to protect loved ones, and the power of ideas to turn the tide of history. In the roar of engines, the thunder of gunfire, and the precise destruction of enemy convoys, the impossible became reality, and the legacy of those steel-winged monsters still echoes across the pages of history. If you found this story gripping, hit the like button. It helps share more forgotten heroes and incredible WWII stories. Don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic dives into history's most daring missions. The skies may have fallen silent, but the legend of the B-25 strafers and the man who made them unstoppable will never fade.